kiss, and then we sever. A farewell, alas, forever. Deep in headstrong tears I'll pledge thee, warring sighs and groans I'll wage thee. Who shall say that fortune grieves him, while the star of hope she leaves him? Mean a cheerful twinkle lights me, dark despair around benights me. I'll ne'er blame my partial fancy, nothing could resist my Nancy, but to see her was to love her, love but her, and love forever. Had we never loved, say blindly, had we never loved, say kindly, never met or never parted, we would ne'er be broken-hearted. Fare thee well, thou first and fairest. Fare thee well, thou best and dearest. Thine be ilka joy and treasure, peace, enjoyment, love and pleasure. A fond kiss, and then we sever. A farewell, alas, forever. Deep in headstrong tears I pledge thee, warring sighs and groans I'll wage thee.
Well, hello and welcome to another Restore Live. Restore Live going out live to the British Unionist People's Voice, also to Restore UK on Facebook, and also to our YouTube channel. Now, what I would like to do is I would like to ask people on the live chat is to tag people into the stream. If there's anyone that you think that might want to come along to have a look at a stream like this, please tag them into the live chat. Also, what you can do is that you can share via the Facebook channel at Restore UK, and also via the British Unionist People's Voice. And on a Tuesday evening, well, this is Scotland night, and this is a very special night for the people in Scotland. Today is St Andrew's Day, and no doubt we'll have some chat from David and his guest Rhona Cameron this evening, and they'll be speaking, I would assume, about St Andrew, and basically, yeah, we'll just leave it to David, we'll leave it to Rhona, and I do look forward to hearing what they have to say. I'd like to introduce David Griffiths and also Rhona.
Thank you very much, John. Thank you. Hello, everybody. And it is my great pleasure to introduce as my guest tonight, my friend, my colleague, and my fellow candidate for the Scottish Parliament in May, Rhona Cameron. Good evening, Rhona.
Good evening, David. Good evening.
Hello, 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 hello. So, as is customary on these nights, I'm going to ask Rhona just to tell us a little bit about herself. But as John said, this is a very, very special night for everyone here in Scotland. This is St Andrew's Day. It is the day where we celebrate our patron saint. And it's a fabulous time of year because it's only a short time before Christmas. It's a short time before Hogmanay, New Year's Eve, which is the special day in the Scottish calendar. And it's a time when people are all nice to each other. And on that very in that vein, today I was at the Rangers Football Club AGM, got talking to some people afterwards, some Celtic fans and some Rangers fans, all having great crack, really good fun, and exactly how Scotland should be. So I just thought I'd say that to start off tonight, because that's exactly how Scotland used to be before the SNP and the separatists started to try their best to tear us all apart. Luckily, Rhona and I and many others are here to stop them doing exactly that. So, having said all that as a little intro, I'd like to ask Rhona just to tell us a little bit about herself. Rhona, tell us a little bit about what you've done up till now and what you do now, and just a little bit about yourself for the benefit of those who don't know you, Rhona, please.
Okay, good evening, everybody. Well, my background really is a mixture of business, sales, generally working with the public. I had my own business for 25 years, of which I worked in Glasgow city centre and had a clientele which was very broad, ranged from all walks of life, all religions, all political backgrounds, business backgrounds, and just meeting hundreds of people every week. So therefore, I have a cross range of what Scotland was like before and all the varied ideas of what people feel about Scotland and what they feel about it now. And then I went on to some sales and finally just got so sort of disillusioned by what was going on in Scotland. Needed a voice. Scotland needs a voice to sort of talk for the majority. The majority are very unhappy and very frustrated. And that's where I got in contact with David, and the rest is history. We're now working as a group and trying to build a big movement of people that are actually going to be able to find a voice, because they're finding it difficult at the moment.
Absolutely right. Just for the benefit of those of you who don't know anything about Rhona, Rhona was someone who was very active on social media in the lead up to the Scottish elections in May. And I got in touch with Rhona to say it would be great if you could join us and take part, because she clearly had the same, if you like, sentiment as we did. And I knew that she would be somebody who would be really helpful. And so she did. And she's been incredible, really, really helpful. And so that's how it happens. It just seems that it's happened almost organically, if you like. We've all found each other. It wasn't in any way a planned thing, a deliberate thing. We just about reached out to one another, found common ground, and all became part of the same movement. And that's how it's been, and that's how it's going to continue. And so Rhona's quite right. Since the holiday elections in May, we've gone on to establish other little groups of people who try very hard to work together to agree ways to attract people to our way of thinking and to ensure that we don't allow the insidious and very, very damaging, corrosive threat of nationalism to ruin our country. And that's exactly what we've done. So Rhona, tell me, if you couldn't tell the people, what was it that made you feel you would like to get involved in politics, albeit in the background, as you, I know that you felt that at the time that you wanted to stay in the background. What was it made you feel that you should get involved?
Well, the biggest start, which I think a lot of people throughout Scotland have got these issues too, there was a big project. I live in Ayrshire, and the Scottish Government were planning to have a big oil rig decommissioning project, which was going to have a huge impact on not only the local residents for their safety, their well-being, their general environmental health, but it was also going to have an impact on tourism. Now, a group got together to sort of challenge this, and then there was the huge realization that no matter how many letters you wrote, how many emails, how many meetings you tried to set up, there was just a huge big wall of silence. And also not just silence, there was a lot of misleading information, leaflets given out to the community, and therefore the community round here, which actually ended up consisting of hundreds and hundreds of people, had to do some of their own crowdfunding to get their own environmental QC to challenge the government. And really, at the end of the day, this is going on all over Scotland. And I think people are not getting listened to. The Scottish Government shut down what they don't want to hear. And they don't engage in their communities, actually. So people are left very frustrated with no voice and no representation within the Scottish Government. And it's very frustrating. And I think it's happening all over. It's happening with our schools. It's happening with education. It's happening with the health board. There are people that are not being able to speak. And therefore, we need to have a huge voice. And that has to be all of us collectively to make an impact.
Absolutely right. This Rhona's touched on a point which I've mentioned in the past on these podcasts. There is very much the feeling, and it's not just the feeling, it's the case, that there are vast swathes of the Scottish electorate who don't feel represented, who feel disenfranchised because of the nationalist government. And you see every day, you'll see echoes of this. You'll see people saying, oh yes, of course, if only we were free of the shackles of Westminster and the yoke of English imperialism and all this utter nonsense, then we would be fine. Rubbish. The fact is that there are people in Scotland, and the majority of people in Scotland don't have any wish to be torn apart from the rest of the United Kingdom, despite what the SNP say, despite what the separatists, the Green Party and the SNP say. And Rhona's so right there. And so it's critically important that we develop a voice, and we find a voice, and we allow our voices to be heard. And that's exactly what we do. And this is why we do what we do. So you touched upon something also there, Rhona. I know that this is something that you feel, about which you feel very strongly, and that is the impact of this horrible creeping nationalism on our nation's children. Could you just tell us a little bit about what your experiences are of school children and the impact of the SNP and the Greens and how that's manifested itself? Would that be okay?
Yes. Well, I think it's changed for probably a lot of people maybe that are watching this. I think the whole education has changed in regards to what I perceive as propaganda with the children in the schools now. I think that the curriculum is definitely set for Scottish as opposed to British, which, an element of learning about your own country's history is vital. But I think what concerns me is, I think a lot of the councils, what's been in the media a lot recently, almost sexualising our children too young. This sexualisation at such a young age, children age 4 being able to choose their gender without the parental consent. I feel the schools and whoever is behind the decisions that are being made with the authorities, that parental consent is being withheld in a lot of incidents. And I think it's wrong. I think the parents should be allowed to choose when it comes to sexual education, the extent of what their children are being taught. In regards to the propaganda, well, I'll give you a small example. My children, they were a project at their school which was on the democracy of Scotland, and they had 2 local MSPs in, and they were both, one was the Green Party and one was SNP. So it was, you would hardly say it was an impartial representation of what democracy in Scotland is about. And I think the schools should have, I think it's wrong, and I think the schools should have waited until all representatives could be able to give children a far more rounded view of politics in Scotland.
Quite right. And just to pick up on that point, Rhona brought this to my attention. This was about 2 weeks ago. There had been a visit to a school, a secondary school in North Ayrshire, which is where both Rhona and I live. Now, both Rhona and I again stood for election to the Scottish Parliament as prospective regional candidates to be elected to Holyrood for the West Scotland region. Now, some of the other people who stood alongside us happened to be successful and to be elected. And those people were, for example, just to name two, Jamie Green, the Conservative candidate for the North Ayrshire region, which is where we both live, and Katie Clark, who was the Labour candidate for the same region. Neither of whom were elected as constituency candidates, but both of whom were elected as regional list candidates, and that's lovely for them. When Rhona told me that this academy had invited local MSPs, and I think they said all 8 MSPs in the region, I think that's what they said, Rhona. They said that the school said, we invited them all, only 2 accepted. So I got in touch with both Jamie Green and Katie Clark, who's the Labour, one of the Labour regional MSPs for the West Scotland region, to say, okay, guys, do you mind me asking, were you invited to this? Was there a reason you couldn't go? Got in touch with them on Twitter. Neither one replied. Now, I found that enormously disappointing because, firstly, they're being invited to speak to the nation's, to our region's youth. They're not accepting the offer, seemingly. Secondly, when they're being asked, why did you not accept the offer? Can I just confirm that you were invited? They didn't answer. So I find that very, very disappointing. And so when people say, oh, it's terrible, the SNP and the Green Party, the pro-nationalist movement is corrupting or trying to persuade our nation's youth to vote for them, well, maybe it's no surprise if the other people, if the supposedly pro-UK MSPs and representatives are not even bothering to follow up on invitations, and certainly not even bothering to answer, frankly, their constituents, which is what we are. And I found that desperately, desperately disappointing. And this is what annoyed me in the lead up to the May elections. People were saying to us, why are you standing against Conservatives and Labour? Because they are pro-UK. Really? Are they? Are they honestly? Are they actually? Or did they just say that they are? Because they didn't appear to take much notice or take much interest in acting as pro-UK, anti-nationalist MSPs when they were given the opportunity to go and speak to the young people in their region. I found that really, really disappointing. And it's for that reason, one of the many reasons, that we decided to stand, because we felt, well, we're not really being represented well by our opposition MSPs. So that's one of the myriad reasons why we stood. And it's why we would do it again, because that's just not good enough. And to this day, I still haven't had an answer from either of the people I requested. So terribly, terribly disappointing. Did you get anything did you hear anything back about what was said at that discussion at all, Rhona? Do you know what the SNP and the Green MSPs had to say?
It was only like last week or the week before. So I would quite like to just look into, actually, neither of them are in my children's years, unfortunately. So it's not direct. I'd like to see what they are getting taught with democracy in Scotland. They're also getting taught wars of independence and everything. So they are getting bombarded, I think, with a sort of one-sided propaganda slightly. And I think that the children, I feel that if I didn't have a huge input as a parent to give them a very balanced view on British politics, international politics for that matter, they would be very, very honed in on Scotland's politics, Scotland. And I think that's wrong. I think the children are not getting a balanced UK education. I
think that's absolutely right. I can remember I've lived half my life in Scotland, half my life in England. The reason I tell you this is I was living in the south of England until about the late 90s, and I moved back to Scotland just at the time that we were having children, and both my children were born in Glasgow, like their dad. Lucky them. But I remember when they went to school, I do remember that they used to come home, my daughter used to come home and her friends used to come home and say, "Is this Scottish food?" Just whatever food they were being served, they wanted to know if it was Scottish food. And I thought, what a peculiar question. And it just seems that in schools, there is this drive to establish Scottishness.
Yes.
And it just seems bizarre. I mean, what is Scottish food? What do we grow in Scotland?
Well,
Crops.
what they try and do, which is fair enough to some degree, is
Yeah.
their menus, they are promoting local produce and all the rest
Yep.
of it. But it is, again, it's branded as Scottish. Everything
Yes.
branded. It's I think it's a very mindset of nationalism.
Mm.
I mean, it's great to be patriotic about your country, but they have to be open-minded that it's not, if it's not Scottish, it's still good. You know, that's where I feel it's, you know, everything has to be Scottish, Scottish, Scottish. And I think I feel it's a little bit too one-tracked for the children.
I agree. And we know that there is this drive among nationalists that whereby they think that any food product which bears the Union Jack is in some way unpatriotic, and you see people in social media all the time saying this nonsense about, I'm not going to buy this nonsense, it's branded with the butcher's apron, as they call it, this ridiculous term they use for the Union flag, which of course is the flag of this country. Let's not forget it's the flag of the four nations of the United Kingdom. And so I find that really, really unpleasant and deeply, deeply distressing. I don't like it at all. I'll never be happy with that, because you're right. Nationalism is something. Patriotism is something quite different. Patriotism is very much to be applauded. You know, it's wonderful to be proud of your country. Nationalism is something very different. I think it always. Yeah. You go on, Rhona.
About it is that most of our exports, which are really all internationally well known as Scottish products, most of the exports are unionists, and this is why the ridiculous behaviour of the nationalists, where they boycott these companies.
Yes.
Why are they doing that? They're actually damaging their own economy. They're damaging their own people. They're damaging their own employees. You know, it's absolutely crazy, which is impacting on families. But all your big exports, I would say nearly all of them are unionists. And then they are frightened to speak out because of the division and because of all the hassle and intimidation that they get online and all the rest of it. And yet we should be proud. We should all be very proud to be Scottish and proud to have our all our exports that are going internationally and all over the world. But I wish these people would realise that the exports and trade within the UK is so important. It's important for our economy, and my friends that are all involved in importing and exporting produce and goods know that, and that's why they're unionists, because they know the impact it would have if there was a separation situation.
Absolutely. I could not agree more with that. That's exactly the way I look at this. The reason that's the way we look at this, everybody, is because it is an axiomatic truth. It's self-evident. Scotland exports 60% of its goods to the rest of the UK, and something like 30-something% of its goods to the EU. Yet the Scottish nationalists, who complain constantly that Scotland is underdone and left out, their view is that what we must do is break away from the United Kingdom, and with the result that we would have a hard border between Scotland and England. And the reason we'd have to have a hard border is Scottish nationalists seek to rejoin the European Union. Fine, if that's what they want to do, okay. But if you do want to rejoin the European Union, you cannot have a European Union country sharing a land border with another non-EU country without a border.
Absolutely.
You can't do it. You can't do that. Neither the EU nor the UK government would possibly allow. They couldn't do so, because you could not have a situation where people were coming into an EU country, Scotland, and moving unfettered and unchallenged to England, or vice versa. You couldn't have a situation where people are in a non-EU country and travelling unchallenged to an EU country. Nowhere else in the EU does this happen. Now, that's why the idea of Scottish separation, and it is separation, separating Scotland, which is a part of the UK, from the rest of the UK, is such a crazy idea. And we know that this could not possibly work. We know what it's like to live in Scotland and to have a situation where most of your exports, most of your trade is done with your nearest neighbour, your land neighbour, England and Wales, and Northern Ireland being just straight across the sea. You cannot just say, well, you know what, I'm a little bit fed up with Boris Johnson, therefore what I'd quite like to do is be independent. Guys, no, you can't do that. You can't just say, this is what we think we should do, therefore let us do it because we said so. No, absolutely not. And so we will fight against this forever because we know it is an insane notion. It's a crazy notion. We know that it would never work for the people of Scotland. If we thought there was the slightest chance that this could lead to prosperity in Scotland or to advancements in Scotland or to some sort of improvement in Scottish life, we'd be all for it. But we know that it can't. There's no way it can. And you just need to look at the record of the SNP government, the separatist government, since they've been in power, and that's now since 2007. Look at the mess they've made of absolutely everything to see this is how it would be, except magnified many times. Because right now, you've got the situation in Scotland where the SNP can say, okay, yes, we know things are bad, but of course, it's only bad because of Westminster and because we don't have the levers and the full fiscal autonomy to run our own affairs. Yet when they get the opportunity to run their own affairs, they make such a mess of it. So we cannot possibly allow them the opportunity to make a bigger mess of it and to tear Scotland out of the United Kingdom. We won't do that. We simply will not do that. And this is a source of enormous worry to people in Scotland because we see these people, more and more of them, voting for these charlatans who are clearly not either not meaning what they say or else so deluded that they do mean what they say, which is even more worrying. So we will never let this happen. Never. Believe me, we'll never let this happen. So no, you're quite right, Rhona. So tell me a little bit more about what you've heard from young people. Is there anything that your children at school have told you about, anything that happened in school which has been of concern to you?
No, I would say generally, I mean, I monitor what goes on in the local school very closely. And I think generally the school they're at, they don't seem to have any major issues. However, one of the big things that has been up in the media recently, which I think is an important thing, is this sexual quiz that they were getting, not quiz, what's the word, questionnaire that they were getting. Where it was asking them very personal questions. And that I find very concerning as a parent. Now, some councils have chosen not to give the children this questionnaire, but any parent I talk to is actually absolutely horrified by this.
Yes.
If the parents are not asked, and furthermore, who's sort of organising this? Why are they asking the children all these questions? And what are they using the data for? Where is it going? I think they're far too young. I think children should be kept young as long as possible and their childhood kept as innocent as possible. And I think they're blowing all that. And having chatted to quite a lot of business people in Glasgow, Sturgeon has organised like £20 extra for child benefit or whatever she sort of said yesterday, the day before. And now, then you're looking at what's going on. Are the children actually going to receive this money, or are the parents that from deprived, is that then going to go on more drugs? Is it going to go on more alcohol? How are they going to monitor that the children are actually going to benefit from getting this extra money? When chatting to people in Glasgow recently and the businesses, Argyle Street, which used to be one of the main shopping areas that was very safe and everybody, going up and down, enjoying their days out, coffee shopping, meeting people and whatever. The businesses there are now telling me that children are now openly doing, and drug dealers are doing open drug deals on the streets in Argyle Street, on the seats. There's stabbings, there's all sorts going on. And the police are not turning up till an hour later. And is this Sturgeon's taking her eye off the ball with drugs? These are young people. This is our young culture that getting involved in this. This
Yep.
then links into mental health. Then if they've got mental health issues, they can't get appointments for a long, long time. So that's not being dealt with.
Yep.
The youth are being actually, although she's making out as though she's looking after them, I think they are being neglected.
No, I totally agree. I think that the way that the youth of Scotland is being treated is, you're going to be one of us, and if you're not one of us, then hell mend you. That seems to be the way it's happening. And we know that Scotland has desperate problems with drink culture, drug culture, violence, terrible, terrible problems. Now, you're not going to resolve any of those.
Why is that, David?
Why is it indeed? It's a fantastic question. I can remember, and these are not new things. I mean, there's always been a drink problem in Scotland. We know that. I can remember way back in the early 90s when the film the book Trainspotting and the film came out, and it was all about the heroin problem in Edinburgh, where there had been, if you remember, Edinburgh at that time was considered the AIDS capital of Europe because people were taking intravenous drugs and sharing needles and all this stuff. And I can remember my cousin from East Belfast, her son was studying to be a doctor in Edinburgh. And I remember meeting him, going up to a football or a rugby match, I think it was. And I said, God, it must be terrible here if you're working in medicine with the heroin problem. And he said, forget heroin. The problem here is drink. And that's what he said. So there's always been that problem with, there have always been social issues in Scotland. There's always been a problem with alcohol. We know that. The fact that heroin and drugs are added to that makes it even worse. But we know that recently, in the last, I don't know how many, 5 years is it, Scottish drug deaths, and that means deaths from illegal drugs, has risen so vastly that Scotland is now per capita has the worst record of drug deaths in all of Europe. And we know that the SNP government cut drug funding in terms of dealing with drug problems by, I don't know, several million, 50 million pounds, I think it was. Now they've got this idea that we're going to have safe consumption rooms, as they call them, or shooting galleries, as they're also called. And the idea of this is, I touched on this last week, I'm sure, the idea of this is that you can go along to these places and take your illegal drugs in a safe environment. Well, isn't that lovely? But it doesn't get away from the fact that these are illegal drugs which cause enormous harm to people. So yes, there is one part of it that where if you share needles and use unclean needles, you're going to get in some bother. But it doesn't take away from the fundamental issue, which is if you take these drugs, you are literally ruining your life. And the SNP's unbelievably short-sighted solution to this is, come along here and take your totally illegal drugs, which you acquire through God knows what means. Just come and take them here and you'll be fine. I mean, I just cannot possibly understand it. That how could they possibly think that's the right way to treat our nation's youth? Because it is mainly young people who take these drugs. We just had a question, and we try and do this, Rhona, and we try and incorporate the questions we get in. So Eddie Barry, hello Eddie. Why are homeless veterans not getting homes in Scotland? Is this an SNP thing to keep them in the streets? Eddie, I think you're exactly right. You know that in this country there is far more emphasis put on housing people who have come in from abroad seeking asylum, for example, or purportedly seeking asylum. We know that these people are given masses of help, far more so than our nation's veterans, for example, are given. And so you will see in any street in any major city, not in any street, but in any major city in Scotland, and in fact in the UK, you will see homeless people, many of whom are veterans. And I think the treatment of our ex-forces veterans is an utter scandal. And the fact that we can find it in our hearts, or the government can find it or believe it sensible and practical and the right thing to do to treat would-be immigrants with far more concern and far more care and consideration than the veterans whose efforts kept this country safe. I think that's an utter scandal. I think it's an utter disgrace. And it could well be that this is just part of a plan to keep veterans, or to maybe to disincentivize people from joining the armed forces. I'm not sure. But I cannot accept that it is more important for this country to look after would-be immigrants than our own ex-servicemen. I cannot accept. I will never accept that. And people say, "Oh, isn't it terrible? These people, they're coming from foreign countries where they've escaped tyrannical regimes or whatever." These people are trying to get to this country coming from France. France isn't a tyrannical regime. It's perfectly okay in France. They don't like being there. That's a great shame. But it's nothing to do with us. You know, it's not our problem that they don't like being in France. The answer to not liking being in France is not, let's go to Great Britain. That's a ridiculous argument. So yes, I couldn't agree more with you, Eddie. I think you're quite right. And I think the treatment of our veterans in Scotland is shocking, and in the rest of the UK is no better, to be honest. So I'm not sure I'd lay that blame at the feet of the SNP, although I'm always happy to lay blame at the feet of the SNP. But yeah, they certainly don't help. Well, you won't hear the SNP saying, "My God, we've got to do something about the plight of ex-British Army veterans." Not a chance, not in 100 years. You'll never hear that, because it would alienate their core vote. We know that. So yes, very, very good point, Eddie. So please keep the questions coming in, guys. We're delighted to answer any questions you've got, but I totally share your frustration there, Eddie. Rhona, yes. So in terms of young people, so I know this is something that about which you feel very strongly. What would you say is the answer? What would you like to see happening with young people? Would you like simply that the rest of the nation's leaders and representatives of other political parties get the opportunity to speak to young people, or would you like to see something a little bit more than that? What would you like to see happening?
I don't think children should always be politicised. You know, the political setup, I think, is a bit of a shame. Too young that they get all involved with that. Certainly, latter years in the secondary school, perhaps, if they show, but not to be rammed down their throats.
Yeah.
But I feel there are so many other issues. There's definitely a rise in mental health, whether it's anxiety, depressions, and things going on in the schools. And they do keep an eye on it, but why is it happening in the first place? Why are children under so much mental stress? Is it social media? Is it, you know, on their phones all the time? I think we do need to have a look at our young children, because years ago Scotland was so well known for its education.
Yes.
It was so well known for its inventions, for its skills. We're known all over the world. And yet now I just feel as though this generation, especially with everything that's going on with COVID, you know, that they're slightly lost and they do need a little bit more direction. But I think they have to have a more rounded, balanced education. And I think if they did know about what was going on in the rest of the UK, and they did know what was going on internationally in a bigger ocean as opposed to their own puddle, I think they would actually get on a lot better.
Yes.
There are so many other elements apart from simple education. I mean, you know, years ago you had all your maths, physics, all the rest of it. You learned your stuff and you went out into the world. But now there are so many other elements. Do I think it's doing them much, you know, more harm than good? Yes. Yes, I do. I think they need to sort of get down to sort of more general education. I think there's too many elements that are confusing them actually now.
No, I think that's a very good point. You're quite right when you say that the Scottish education system used to be the envy of the world. And certainly I know I went to secondary school and I did secondary education in England. And I know that England envied the Scottish education system hugely. And this was in the late 70s, so it's fairly recently, you know. But now that's not the case. Ever since John Swinney, first off, got in charge of the education system and started giving exam results by postcode, basically giving it to whichever schools had the best records, in other words, the poshest schools in the nicest areas, and it's just gone crazy. Another question's coming here from the British Unionist People's Voice. Are the SNP conglomerate importing votes when they insist on opening Scotland to anyone else from the rest of the world? A very, very pertinent point. And there is a school of thought that the Labour Party did something very similar in the UK. The Labour Party effectively opened Britain's borders and let pretty much millions of people come in. And bizarrely, it didn't really work for them, because the Labour Party, when they won the general election in 1997, they won again in 2001 and again in 2005, but their vote fell both times. And then come 2010, they were no longer the biggest party. So it didn't really work, but it's clear that they tried to do that. And my honest opinion, my genuine opinion is, yes, I think the SNP is trying to bring in import people whose propensity to vote for the SNP is very high, and the likelihood of these people voting for the SNP is very strong. So I do believe that. My personal belief is that is exactly what's happening. I think that the SNP knows that people in Scotland, in the main, don't really want Scotland to be independent. They don't. But if you get enough people who are from a background which is not Scots, and I'm talking here about, for example, Republican nationalist Irish, of whom there are very many in Scotland, people of that descent. We're talking Muslims, and I'm not saying this to be in any way derogatory, but I'm simply saying that there are people who are of that background. Now, these are people who are not exactly pro-UK. These are people who would quite happily vote for the breakup of the UK. We know that. Therefore, it stands to reason that the more of these people who are in this country, then the higher the likelihood is that Scotland may have an electorate which wants to vote for independence. So yes, I would say that is a real concern, a genuine concern. Now, the difficulty is in Scotland, and this is something I noticed in the lead up to the election in May, it's very difficult to talk about this stuff, because if you talk about, for example, the Irish Catholic vote, people say, you're a bigot. No, I'm not a bigot at all, actually. I'm talking about a proportion of the electorate, a demographic. In the American presidential election last December, there was endless discussion about the Latino vote, the black vote. And nobody said anyone talking about that was bigoted, because they're not. They're simply talking about a portion of the electorate. That's all it is. So yes, my genuine opinion is that, yes, you're right. I think that at least part of the SNP's supposed or purported support for almost limitless immigration is because it will make the numbers stack up a little bit more in their favour. I firmly believe that. Rhona,
Yeah.
what do you think?
Yes, no, I totally agree. I do agree with that. I think, and I think that the sad thing is that the majority of Scotland still do not want independence.
Correct.
They've done a poll recently, and even people that are fairly nationalist minded are not wanting to do it at the moment anyway.
Yes.
So why would they be going ahead? Why are they wasting time, energy, and money when we are trying desperately to get out of a pandemic, which has created havoc as far as the economy, the tourism, employment? People are not interested in independence at the moment. They're not
absolutely
interested in independence at all. And the majority of Scots don't want it anyway. We voted, we said no, and they still say no. So why are we wasting this time on it? It's causing so much stress, it's causing disruption, it's causing uncertainty for businesses, for investment. Why are they doing it? It needs to be stopped, because it's really creating a sort of lull that Scotland can't actually move anywhere, because people don't know what they're doing.
Absolutely right. And I think if you look at that, and that's an enormously important point Rhona makes there. From the point of view of Scotland as a centre of a business, or a place where businesses might want to come, why in the name of God would a business owner decide, I tell you what I'll do, I'll move to Scotland because, well, let's face it, they've got a completely unreliable political outlook. They've got a very, very uncertain future. The geographical climate is terrible. There aren't really roads outside of the major hubs of population like Glasgow and Edinburgh. The rest of the road network is pretty duff, really. You don't have an awful lot of flight hubs either. You've very, very little flight traffic from overseas into this country. So why would you do it? And what's the labour force like? Yeah, it's okay. It's okay. There are lots of people who are very skilled people, but mainly people who have got ambition in Scotland move to England because you can make more money there. No, that's just a fact. I did it several times. I moved to England, came back for another job, moved to England again because there was more money there. don't mean to sound grasping or anything, but that's just what I did. And I think anybody with real ambition will do that in Scotland. That's always going to be the case. So how does that all add up to a situation where people are going to say, let's relocate our businesses to Scotland because the economic outlook is completely unknown. The political outlook is massively uncertain. We don't even know what currency they'll be trading in 10 years' time. So let's move there. No, that's not going to happen, guys. It's never going to happen. So you're right. The idea of people pushing for independence at a time when people don't want it is just crazy. Independence is something you push for if there is an overwhelming desire among the people for it to take place, but that isn't the case. In Scotland, it's at best about 55 against and 45 for. Well, that's not enough to break up the country, not even close. We've got another little message here from Paul, who says, politics is just a game of point scoring for a privilege. Do they care about real people? Time and again, it's proven they don't give two hoots. I couldn't agree more. I think if you look at the way that the Conservative government in Westminster has acted since the beginning of lockdown, I think that bears out your point entirely there, Paul, because I think really they've been scandalous. I think they've been terrible. And much the same in Scotland. We know that in Scotland we've had situations where the SNP government has given grants, for example, to Tommy Shepherd's Comedy Club in lockdown. Now, let's face it, in lockdown, a comedy club is not exactly what you'd consider a vital type of industry, but that's what happened. And last week there was this I think that a freedom of information request was uncovered where an Indian businessman in Scotland had been given something like £600 million, £570 million, I think it was. Unbelievable sums of money, eye-watering sums of money. So yes, I agree with you. I don't think it's in any way indicative of the fact that there's any care for real people in Scotland. I don't believe there is. I think there's just this push for these rather peculiar people to be at the vanguard of Scotland breaking away from the United Kingdom. That's their dream, apparently. And to be honest, Rhona's quite right. There just isn't the appetite for it in Scotland. There isn't even the appetite for another referendum, because why would we have one? We had one only 7 years ago. We had one. It was decisive.
Well,
the result was very clear. Yeah, go on, Rhona.
I think in regards to the question, Paul, is that I think there's an awful lot of spin, especially I feel with SNP. That's why I get so frustrated. I think the media have got a lot to, the Scottish television media seem to add fuel to this, is this constant spin of what they want to be heard.
Yes.
When you scratch below the surface, that is not what's actually happening.
Yes.
You know, laptops, the free bikes, did anybody get them? And as you say, as Paul says, that, you know, are the real people actually being heard? Are they actually getting what they need, or is it all just a show? Is it all a headline for that day? Is there enough going on once the headline's finished? Are they actually producing the goods for people? Are people's lives any better? Is the education any better? Is the health any better? The answer is no.
Absolutely. Absolutely right. Nothing is better in Scotland since the SNP came in. Nothing. Everything, every facet of Scottish life has got worse in the last 14 years. No question. Now, right, it's not beyond debate. It's clear.
Question, David, coming up.
Yep. I saw it from Peter Morris, my friend Peter. Hello, Peter, who was my guest last week, and who was absolutely incredible. It was great, and I had nothing but positive feedback from Peter's appearance last week. So congratulations, Peter. Magnificent. Yes, so how do we deal with the totally weak opposition in Scotland? A first-class question, because we know that the opposition in the Scottish Parliament have overseen hate, deaths, failure, and who are effectively powerless. So true. And this is why we did what we did 6 months ago. We knew that the opposition in Scotland, frankly, wasn't worth a light. It just wasn't good enough. And we said at the time, that when I say we, I'm talking about the All for Unity guys and the people who tried to say to the pro-UK electorate, don't vote for the same parties as you have done up till now, because they're really not going to help you. And we saw this. Rhona, you'll have seen this. All the Conservative Party saying, vote for us twice, give both your votes to us. Absolutely ludicrous. And all that happened is the same amount of Conservative MSPs got in as did the last time. And they're doing equally as bad a job as they did back then. yeah, fair enough that Douglas Ross and Anna Sarwar can land some blows in question time these days, or First Minister's questions. Yeah, they land some blows, but my God, they'd have to be pretty damn useless not to be able to land blows on this administration. I mean, my God. But last week, Anna Sarwar, yes, he landed some blows about the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, quite right too. Douglas Ross he's done okay, but at the same time, they're not really getting to the heart of it, and that is the fact that the SNP administration is taking Scotland backwards rapidly. They're going down this crazy path, seeking independence at a time when independence is pretty much impossible. Scotland, it's almost inconceivable that Scotland can be independent right now. The economic facts simply don't add up. They don't. Okay, this is not conjecture on my part. This is not guesswork. It's absolute, irrefutable fact. Scotland cannot possibly be independent right now and become more prosperous. Scotland could be independent, absolutely, we could, and we'd be immeasurably poorer overnight. Everybody, the cost of all of our imported goods would go up. The value of all of our properties, pensions would go down. That cannot be the right way for Scotland to go. We can't do that just because some people in this increasingly peculiar, marginalised, extremist group of nationalists don't like Boris Johnson. Well, I don't massively like Boris Johnson either, but it doesn't mean I'm going to try and seek independence for Ardrossan or North Ayrshire. That's just ridiculous. Just for God's sake, try and work within the system rather than saying, oh my God, we must leave. No. And you know that it's not for real. You know that this is not a genuine wish that they have. They just want to make trouble. They just want to bring trouble upon the United Kingdom. That's all it is. And as I said last week, sorry, Rhona, as I said last week, you cannot overstress the influence of Irish republicanism on Scottish nationalism because it is vast. It is absolutely vast because the entire, it seems, diaspora of Irish Republican people in Scotland are now voting SNP, whereas in the old days you used to vote Labour. And I don't mean everybody, but the vast, vast, vast majority. And I will not have a situation where, frankly, people who have come into our country are very welcome. Nonetheless, I can't allow them to say, well, I don't really like the institution of the United Kingdom, therefore I'd like Scotland to be independent. Well, that's very interesting. But the rest of Scotland wouldn't like that to happen, and so we're not going to allow it, and that's all there is to it. So, sorry, guys. So that's where I stand on that, Peter. Go on, Rhona.
Okay, well, the way I would look at that, how do we deal with the total weak opposition in Scotland? Well, I think what's happening now is, yes, you're absolutely right, Peter, but they have got probably a lot of other things they're dealing with too, and they do need the public support. And I think people that have been frightened in the past to speak up, they felt intimidated or whatever, they don't want to say what their political views are. I think they do have to speak up now, because I think the tide is turning. I think there are more people, there's movements like Majority Scotland, who are a great opposition movement. If you look them up and find out more about them, they're a great, they're just a movement. It's not a party. So they're a great voice for the people who want to be heard. And what they do is, for the people that don't want to speak up or want to remain anonymous, you can contact them, you can speak to them, and they work behind with the media. So that's where we have to really work on. We have to work on bombarding the opposition with what we feel. We have to be honest. We have to step up and have a voice. And also the media. We have to write to the media, email the media what we want in. But Majority Scotland, I think, are excellent, because they are a company that really try and promote behind the scenes, and they really challenge the opposition to speak out as well. And we all have to do it now. The general public have to speak up now.
Absolutely. Very, very good point. Very, very good point. Majority Scotland, fantastic, like an alternative media company, if you like. These are guys who offer an alternative to the traditional ink press and online media in Scotland, who we know aren't really able to hold up the SNP, the government, to account. We know that. Why do so many people vote SNP was a question that came in there. My honest opinion, and this is my personal opinion, I think a great mass of SNP vote is essentially a protest vote. I've always felt that people in Scotland like to feel that they're voting differently from people in England, because they like to think they're a wee bit more edgy up here. It's Eddie who asked the question. They like to think that they're expressing a protest, if you like. I maintain that this is true. Much of the SNP vote is, in essence, a protest vote. It's a general statement of disaffection with the Westminster government, with maybe the moneyed, wealthy Conservative MPs who form the government, who traditionally form the government, because we know that the Labour Party can't win an election these days. They're just not capable without the votes in Scotland. Most of the votes in Scotland are going to the SNPs, therefore they don't go to the Labour Party, therefore the Labour Party can't win an election. That's just how it is. So I think it's primarily, Eddie, I think it's primarily a protest. That's my opinion. What do you think, Rhona?
Well, why do so many people vote? I think one of the biggest challenges is the Scottish television media. I think that what is coming out from the media on the television screens every night is very pro SNP, and I don't think they give enough voice to the other parties. I don't think they give enough voice to the representation of the majority of Scotland, and I think that is a problem. What's behind that is still questionable. Why the Scottish television media? I think there's lots of theories behind that, but I think that is one of the big issues that we have to deal with. Why they're representing the voice, and so any coverage, it's any publicity, it's like selling. If the people see it, if people are not getting a big enough representation from the opposition, that is why they don't have any alternative opinions.
Yep, very good point indeed. So a lot of reasons, really. It's not just as simple as it's a protest. There is a substantial proportion of the SNP vote, Eddie, which it comes from groups which are frankly not pro-UK, if I can put it that way. As I touched on previously, maybe the Irish Catholic vote, maybe the Muslim vote, and I don't see this to be in any way derogatory about these groups. It's just a fact that they are not exactly tended to be pro-United Kingdom. They're certainly not pro the armed forces, for example. And I made the point the other week about the numbers of incidents where members of the emergency services are being attacked by people in Scotland, and the numbers are quite staggering. And if I've seen it reported that fire brigade and ambulance people are being attacked because they are seen as being representative of Britain rather than Scotland, and so people are starting fires, and when the fire brigade come to put them out, they're getting the rocks and bottles thrown at them. And what is this all about? And I despair, honestly, for the future of Scotland if that's the type of thing that people are doing. It seems absolutely insane. But such is life. But in any country when you've got a section of the electorate, a section of the population which is maybe not particularly well off and maybe a little bit resentful about other people, you're going to get anger, and it's going to manifest itself somehow. And it seems to me that anger and that frustration is being manifested in the way that people vote. And that, I think, is a very big part of it. And I think what we need to do, and I've made this point to Rhona and all my colleagues, we need to start persuading people who are, if you like, soft SNP voters, soft Nats, as we call them, to stop voting for these utter clowns who have got no answers whatever. We've got to persuade them and make it clear to them that they're not going to get anywhere, they're not going to get on in life just by voting for a bunch of nihilistic people who've got no answers at all other than whatever we've got, let's break it up, because that might be fun. And let's face it, what's the worst that could happen? What's the worst that could happen? My God, do you want a list? The worst that could happen is every problem you've got right now will be magnified tenfold. That's the worst that could happen. What's the best that could happen? I can't see an upside. I do not see a single upside of Scotland being independent because, frankly, the economic case isn't there. There is no economic case for Scottish independence. None, whatever. There is no prospect whatever of Scots becoming more wealthy by Scotland becoming independent. It won't happen. It cannot happen. It is impossible. And that's just how it is. And you can listen to all the nonsense that Kate Forbes and John Swinney and Keith Brown and all these complete inadequate chancellors tell you. None of it is true. None of it is true. None of what they say stands up to the most, even the slightest scrutiny. So that's why you'll never see Nicola Sturgeon interviewed by Andrew Neil. You'll see her interviewed by Andrew Marr, who'll say, "Well, it's lovely to see you, Nicola. Oh, isn't it great?" Won't answer a single searching question, whereas Andrew Neil would tear her apart, and that's why you don't see Nicola Sturgeon interviewed by somebody who knows what he's doing. But anyway, that's just a little more of mine. So anyway, right, Rhona, I think our hour is almost up. So tell us what you're going to. What are your plans from now? What will you be doing from now onwards in the coming weeks and months to try and help the situation?
Well, I'm going to be working alongside, just joining the same group, the same people I worked with before, and hoping to be a bit of a background with Majority Scotland, because I think they've got a terrific voice, and just trying to persuade people who were a little bit shy in speaking up before, to try and just be able to have the courage to say exactly how they feel from whichever sector they're in, because the more people that speak out, a sort of bigger movement develops, and then we're more powerful against what were our challenges in the future.
Absolutely right. Now, so Jim Werner here, who's my friend, hello Jim, has said he would like to see more of Rhona on the streams. Very good speaker, very focused. There you go. Isn't that nice?
Thank you very much, Jim.
I knew you'd like her. Rhona's an absolute natural. She's terrific at this, guys. She's been a great colleague of mine, huge help, and she's been nothing but supportive, and she is absolutely on the right side here, guys, believe me. So yes, you will see more of Rhona, you'll see more of Niall, you'll see more of Pete Morris. We may even get George Galloway again one day. Jamie Blackett, who is the leader of All for Unity, was the leader of All for Unity. There's changes happening with All for Unity. He will be on soon. I'm hoping to get him on board. And there are a couple of people from the Orange Order in Scotland whom I'm hopeful will be joining me in the new year. So we're going to keep doing this, guys. And I'm so grateful to John and to Jim for allowing this platform. And thank you, Eddie. Thank you, Peter and Rhona. Brilliant. You're right. You're absolutely right. And so this is terrific for us, because my thank you, Richard. Thank you very much. My strong belief is that the United Kingdom, which is a country, it's not a union, it's a country. And please all remember, it's a country. The union happened years and years ago. This is a country now. We must stress and emphasize the links across the country, because it is one country. And that's what we are. And it's only by reaching out to people in Northern Ireland, in England, Wales, and all across Scotland that we will strengthen those bonds and the links which bind us all. You got to love the Scottish. You're so right, Eddie. We are great people, and we are absolutely hand in hand with you, our friends in Northern Ireland, and we back you to the hilt. Believe me, we will never let this country be broken apart. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. Believe me, we will not allow it to happen. So we are absolutely on board with our friends in Northern Ireland. Rhona and I represent the views of the people in Scotland who are pro-UK, but we absolutely are on board with our friends in Northern Ireland who are similarly of the same view, and that will always be the case. So listen, thank you everyone for the very kind words. I knew you'd like Rhona. She's a terrific person. She's one of the two people I chose to run with me in May. Best decision I made. And I stand by that. She's a terrific lady, a lovely person. So thank you for joining me tonight, Rhona.
Thank you very much. That was great.
Great stuff. And so I know that Rhona, I know you'll be delighted to learn that Rhona will be back with us in the new year. And in the meantime, I'll wrap it up. Thank you to everyone who sent texts in. It's great that you guys and girls support this little podcast. It brings me enormous joy to be able to do this, to reach out to my friends in Northern Ireland and in Scotland to say, believe me, we're all on the same side, and we will never, ever, ever stop. We'll never give up. We'll never let the separatists have their way. Never. So believe me, we are always going to be fighting the good fight for all of us, for all our sakes. So Rhona, if I don't speak to you again, all the very best. Oh, well, I'll see you later on this week at our next little meeting. Thursday, okay. Indeed.
Good night.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, and good night, and we'll speak again next week. Okay, thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
There are any number of issues in Scotland that need addressing. Health, education, drug deaths, the economy, but all of those are taking a back seat at this conference to one issue above all else, and that's an independence referendum.
Scotland doesn't want a Boris Johnson government. It doesn't want to leave the European Union, and it wants to be able to determine its own future, whatever that future turns out to be. And this idea that the Tories can just say no and sort of imprison Scotland in a union against its will, I just don't think will hold.
Independence is what the SNP is all about, and Nicola Sturgeon is expected to reinforce that massively at this conference. There will be no chance for people who are against the First Minister's policies to get a hearing.